Let's go to our panel. Starting in Washington, D.C. is former U.S. Ambassador to Yemen, Gerald Feierstein. Also in Washington is Phyllis Bennis, who directs the new Internationalism project at the Institute for Policy Studies. And finally, in the Swedish city of Gothenburg is the editor-in-chief of the Saana Review, Afrah Nasser. I thank you all for joining us. Phyllis Bennis, let me start with you. So, led by Bernie Sanders, the Sanders-Lee Yemen War Powers Resolution, the vote that will be had in the Senate. Is it a good idea to discuss this?
It's very important. It's in many ways too late, but it's very important that finally the Congress, in this case the Senate, take responsibility for what is supposed to be, under our Constitution, the responsibility of the Congress, which is to declare war, to make the decisions about when to go to war. The president is responsible for executing those decisions, but it's supposed to be up to the Congress. There has been no authorization for this military engagement in Yemen. The officials in Washington who have said this is not our war are simply denying the fact that it could not be waged by the Saudis and the Emiratis without U.S. backing, which includes both massive arms sales, particularly of helicopter gunships, of planes, of bombers, but also very directly. U.S. pilots are flying U.S. Air Force planes to do the in-air refueling of those bombing raids to make it possible. There's been no authorization for that, and it's time there was a vote.
So, Ambassador Feierstein, here's the thinking. The U.S. arms the Saudi-led coalition. They use those arms in what could be tantamount to war crimes, according to human rights activists, human rights groups, and that's why this needs to be pushed to the Senate so Congress can actually decide whether the U.S. should be involved in this war at all. Does that sound accurate to you?
Well, I think this is certainly the debate that goes on here in the United States as well as in the UK and elsewhere. And the issue is, how do you understand what it is that the Saudis are trying to accomplish? And is that legitimate? And beyond that, are they using appropriate means to try to achieve their objective? And so this is really the question that's before the Congress as well as more broadly in the society.
And so you followed it closely. So where do you stand on this? Is the Saudi-led coalition committing war crimes?
No, I don't believe that they're committing war crimes. I think that these are things that need to be explored and investigated. I don't believe that there is any kind of investigation yet that has established that this has happened. I think that there are two issues here. One is that the Saudi intervention, which the United States supported and still supports, was based on international law. There's a UN Security Council resolution, and also, of course, a recognition that the Saudis had legitimate security concerns. We can all agree that the implementation of the Saudi campaign, what's happened in the air campaign, has had unfortunate collateral damage, unfortunate civilian casualties. And I think that to the extent that we can help the Saudis improve their performance, we should and need to do that. But I think that allegations about war crimes and other kinds of very hot language don't help the situation.
Okay, they don't help the situation, but that doesn't mean it might not be true. Phyllis, I'm going to give you a moment to respond in just a minute. I want to bring Afrah in now. Afrah, big picture, how much of a factor is the United States in the war practically as things stand?
The most powerful country in the world is supporting the Saudi-led coalition. There is no question about that. Since Barack Obama's administration till Donald Trump administration, there has always been the support policy to the Saudi-led coalition, and it's very frustrating to listen to anyone that thinks there are no war crimes committed in Yemen and they're just simply collateral damage. I don't know what to say to people who have lost loved ones at weddings, at funerals. at schools. These people have, legitimate right for justice, and definitely what's happening in Yemen is a war crime. Recently, there is concrete evidence submitted in a report by the Yemen panel, Yemen experts panel to the UN Security Council, in which they were listing in details all the humanitarian, international humanitarian laws that are violated over the past 3 years. And in 2 weeks, we're going to enter the 4th year of this really bloody war. So there is no any doubt that these countries in Western countries that are, having disregard to all these reports and still supporting a bloody war. What is happening is definitely, in so many levels, is war crime. The fact that myself, as I speak to you, I don't know who is going to be the next victim in Sana'a or Aden from my family. That by itself for me is a war crime. There is no any, no war is clean, and there is no war that never has innocent lives being wasted. And but the question would be, would the Congress really support the Congress latest movement will help in ending the war?
Right.
In my opinion, I think the final say would be, unfortunately, not at the international stage. It will be at the regional stage.
Right.
It's what the Saudis and the Emiratis would want. Unfortunately, just last week, there was another arms deals between NBS and UK with multi-billion.
And I'm gonna ask the ambassador about that in a moment. So just bear with me, because you're bringing up a bunch of issues here, sort of looking forward. But let me bring in Phyllis now. Phyllis, you were shaking your head when Ambassador Feierstein was saying that he doesn't think war crimes are being committed. Tell me why.
Well, we just heard some very powerful information from Afrah about the level of civilian casualties, 2/3 of the civilians. And we should recognize that there were 10,000 who had been killed as of January of last year, January of 2017, when the counting essentially stopped. There is significantly more. Maybe 11,000, maybe 12, maybe 13,000. We don't know how many. 2/3 of them have been killed by these U.S.-backed air raids, bombing raids, in which U.S. officials are already and have been engaging with the Saudis to, quote, help them in targeting. What they are doing is enabling this attack to go forward. And I would also challenge the ambassador on the question of U.S. law, beyond the international law question. The War Powers Act does not specify that it only kicks in when a certain level of war crimes have been committed. It is to apply to any use of force, any deployment of U.S. troops, including, in this case, Air Force pilots and others who are working in the rooms with the Saudi and Emirati forces who are choosing the targets, that sort of thing, that any deployment of force is to be determined by the Congress, with only 3 exceptions, none of which apply here. If the U.S. territory is attacked, if U.S. personnel have been attacked, and these kinds of things have, or if U.S. territories have been attacked, the Houthis have not attacked the United States. So the notion that there is an exemption here, which of course, even when it's used, is only viable for 90 days, for 60 days, even under those circumstances, there has been no indication, and no one is even making the claim, that this has anything to do with an attack on the United States. This is about supporting Saudi Arabia in their regional challenge to Iran.
Okay.
This is all about the U.S. antagonism to Iran, and it's Yemenis paying the price.
Okay, so Ambassador Feierstein, you've got your work cut out for you. You're in the minority on this panel. Both the other panelists disagree with you. Go ahead, sir.
Well, first of all, the last speaker made a number of assertions that I believe are not correct. The United States, certainly not when I was still in the government, and I haven't heard that it's changed since. The United States does not participate in identifying targets inside of Yemen. nor are U.S. pilots or other personnel involved directly in the conflict. The extent of U.S. engagement. Excuse me, I didn't interrupt you. There is no U.S. direct engagement except for some personnel who are involved in counterterrorism initiatives, which are covered under the AUMF, the use of military force. So I don't think that some of these assertions are correct. The United States does support Saudi Arabia and does support the coalition, and again, the coalition's activities are within the umbrella of UN Security Council Resolution 2216. The Saudi effort is engaged in trying to reestablish a legitimate government of Yemen in Sana'a, as supported by the international community. So again, we can talk about concerns that we all have, and I share those concerns about some of the aspects of the way this war has been pursued. We can try to improve the pursuit, but as your previous commentator noted, there is no conflict without unfortunate incidents. Right. Certainly not in our experience in Afghanistan or elsewhere, and this is unfortunately the case here.
Let me ask you, Ambassador Feierstein, since you do support the Saudi-led coalition's goals and aims, I know you're not a fan of the Houthis, I know you support Hadi's government and the US backing them. So if the vote goes through in the Senate and Congress says we shouldn't actually be in this war, would you want the president as commander-in-chief to ignore that vote?
Well, it depends on what the language of this resolution is. And, you know, the United States, again, the role of the U.S. in this conflict is not such that were the U.S. to withdraw, that it would mean an end to the conflict. The Saudis and the Emiratis and the other coalition members would be perfectly capable of continuing the conflict without any engagement from the United States. So in that sense, it would be a meaningless resolution. But I do believe that if it comes to the president's desk, he should and would veto it.
Okay, so Afrah, I'm going to give you an opportunity to build on what you mentioned earlier on. And it basically follows through what Ambassador Feierstein was saying. If the Americans actually withdraw, this would still continue because it will be sorted out, however ugly it gets, at a regional level, whether the United States is involved or not. Tell me a bit more about that, Afrah.
Well, I need to stress on the fact that all warring parties in Yemen have committed war crimes, not only the Saudi-led coalition, and all of them are responsible of the tragedy unfolding in Yemen. But definitely, the military abilities of the Saudi-led coalition is bigger and larger than the other warring parties. The fact that the Congress is trying to to put a political stance to what's going on in the conflict in Yemen, I think it's a symbolic move, and it's really hopeless at the White House. And Yemeni's hope is only in the Congress. That's what I've always believed in. But I'm not that optimistic, even though it's a great move and it's symbolic. But I'm not that optimistic because I think the Saudi and the Emirati lobby at the Capitol Hill is stronger. That we cannot underestimate how powerful such lobbying would be there. But no matter what is the result, in my opinion, I think the final say should be at the regional stage. Both the Saudis and the Emiratis have to understand that this is not the way to weaken the Houthis or the Iranis. This is not the way. There has to be another, political understanding from them in which, to save Yemenis' lives and to at least not let Yemen get this fragmented. The report that I was just mentioning earlier, it states clearly that Yemen as a state doesn't exist anymore. So is that what the Saudi-led coalition wanted to accomplish? whether their goal is to reinforce the legitimacy of Abdurrabbu Mansour Hadi or not. I mean, regardless of this, what they are doing now is actually dissolving Yemen into pieces. There is no Yemen state anymore. So for how long they're going to continue with this, bloody war with such, pointless end? That's the question.
Right. Okay, we're out of time. I'll let that be the final word from the Yemeni on the panel. My apologies if we couldn't get more conversation in. The fault is all mine. But for the moment, Ambassador Gerald Feierstein, Phyllis Bennis, and Afrah Nasser, I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.